Welcome to Security Weekly's Virtual Hacker Summer Camp 2020. I am your host, Matt Alderman. Yes, you get me twice in a row. Joining me for this interview segment is Liam Downward. He's the CEO of Cyrisma. Liam, welcome to Security Weekly.
Welcome. Thank you. Oh, I said welcome. Hello.
So we're going to talk about complexity. We're going to talk about data. Give us a little background on yourself and Cyrisma. I don't think many people have heard of you, so it might be good to start with a little intro.
Yeah. Again, Cyrisma, we're new to the industry, and what we're trying to do is to detangle complexity when it comes to security, to make it simple, make it easy for people to actually have information to mitigate in a timely manner. All right. Now, what does that mean? Because if you look at solutions that are out there right now, we actually there's a lot. There's a landscape is huge. There's so many different things, but they bring complexity. We have issues with resources, time, money, and people. So for me, when we started Cyrisma a long time ago, a couple of years ago, the idea was being a consultant, going out to customers in the industry and asking them various questions and saying, hey, what are you doing for certain things? What are you doing to protect your environment? A lot of times they will say, we'll buy the basics, or we will just accept the risk. And if we try to buy something, it will be in next year's budget or the following year's budget because we can't afford it, people, time, and money again. So it made us think about how we develop Cyrisma to focus primarily on the data and then work out from the data to the vulnerabilities, to the secure configuration, and making it easy for people to mitigate, especially in the micro enterprise, which is like 1,500 user environments or below. So that's how we got to from a Cyrisma perspective.
Yeah, what I think is interesting is you went after the data problem first. I mean, when we think about a lot of the solutions we would deploy, you know, we're going through this checklist of maybe a set of compliance requirements. I need a firewall. I need a SIM for log. I need to do vulnerability scanning, and yeah, I got to do encryption. But you know, you go through this big checkbox of, and you start implementing all these solutions. Then you start to realize, wait, I got to bring this data together. I got to centralize it, right? And for smaller organizations, you don't necessarily have the resources to do these large SIM integrations with your vuln management scanners and pulling all your logs from your firewalls and all these other things, which is a challenge, I think, for any small, medium business, just because they don't have the resources. You actually went after some of the data challenges first. Describe kind of why there, but then also what are you doing there to help people really protect their data?
So the reason why we did it, because if you think about it, when somebody has a breach or a compromise, what's the first thing that actually happens? The data, right? That is the value of every entity, is the data. So let's focus on that. Where is your data? Who has access to it? And is the system that it's on secure? Right. So that's why we focus from the inside out. You know, we're reversing the defense in depth from focusing from the outside in. We have perimeter security, then you have on network, and then your endpoints and so forth. Well, we thought, well, let's flip it. Why don't we go the opposite direction, focus on the data and work outwards, but then also bring accountability into it. So it allows for people to focus on that. But if you look at it, the data is integral. What we do is we let people know where it's at, how many people have access to it, and where's it stored? In the cloud? Is it on premise? And now, you know, in some of the the interviews that you guys have done this week, they talk about the new paradigm of the open network in the sense of the VPNs of people working from home. Now you've got that as a data point that you need to bring into the equation. And how do you do that without basically interrupting the workflow for people to be productive because they're at home? So we want to grow with the landscape as new data sets come into it, and let's bring them in and allow people to be able to mitigate it, not from an IT perspective, but from a data owner perspective as well.
Yeah, I think the one big challenge, you know, we did a debate every Christmas. We do our little round tables, and you know, one of our conversations was kind of like, what are the basics? I mean, look, at the end of the day, it's asset inventory, and data is part of one of those assets. Finding it, classifying it, and understanding ownership is no small task for any organization because it can be in so many different places. So walk us through kind of your secret sauce, or how do you discover where that data is? How do you allow that classification to happen, assign data ownership? Walk us through that, because to me, that's just foundational. Because if I don't know
Correct.
what data I have and how critical it is, how am I ever going to put the right security controls in place?
Yeah, and there's two sides of it. Like if you do a data classification review internally, everybody sits down around a table and we're just taking people's word for it of where data potentially can be. So what we want to do is to take that and say, okay, let's interject into our system. We go out and we find the data and we identify and classify it. We bring it back. Then the custodians can then actually assign it to a data owner for review and mitigate without actually physically touching the data itself. So that brings the simplicity into it. So as we do that, we bring accountability in. But the bottom line is that wherever the data is, we can identify that. Sorry. Always the way of somebody calling during a meeting. I apologize for that. So when somebody connects to our data set or the data itself, we're able to identify, again, like I said before, who has access to it, where is it, who is the data owner of it, as in, could be the owner of the folder, or it could be within the actual department that you can assign to. And then once that's done, a mitigation is derived, providing that we don't have to print out thousands of pages of reports and go through an Excel spreadsheet and everything else. Through our interface, say for you, Matt, I could assign something to you. You can go through it wherever you are in the world. You can be remote, you can be on site, go through the web interface, and you can actually determine what you want to do with that data. Delete, encrypt, move to a secure location, i.e. quarantine. It's a false positive, or take no action, because that's something that we do. And then we can generate reports very quickly. I'll give you an example of that from a success standpoint for one of our clients. They were currently utilizing another product, and they were just printing out reports on a monthly basis and handing it to the data owners. They didn't see any transactional movement at all because it was a report and they didn't have any accountability. As soon as they implemented our solution, they were able to identify the data, assign it to the owner, and then at the same time show leadership that there's changes being made very quickly because of that one component of mitigation that made it easier for people to just cycle through, file, and make a decision, rather than trying to go to the report and then go to the file to actually delete it or remove it. And they have to VPN in, they have to do all these other things. It just kept things very simple. And that environment was a 1,000-user environment, but they only had 4 people in their department. So you can imagine 4 people trying to work on security as well as IT. Then they used the tool, and then it offset them to be able to go and manage it effectively. So it made life easier for them as part of that process.
Well, we saw a similar problem in the vulnerability management space in the early days. We'd print the report, we'd hand it to the IT folks, and
Correct.
go, okay, go patch all these systems. What it sounds like you've done is really created a collaboration tool that not only identifies where that data is, but allows the data owners to come in and interact with those results through that workflow to make it easier, to reduce the amount of time and resources needed to actually do something or take an action with that data.
Absolutely. Even from the vulnerability standpoint, in the back of our minds as we were thinking this, is that it would be phenomenal to be able to think, okay, where that data is, how secure is that system or that entity that's housing that data? Because then that's a different risk level that you apply to the data. So the data gets given a risk grade or a classification, but then the system itself, how do you mitigate that? So who's responsible for that? I.e., is it IT or is it the data owner? Is that in the cloud and so forth? So we wanted to make it easier again, and keeping that track of that workflow by focusing on a risk, a root cause analysis, basically making it easier for somebody, instead of looking at all the different types of vulnerabilities, scale it down to say, okay, those 1,000 vulnerabilities are these root causes, which could be 15, and you have very quick actionable items. Another example is a customer of ours wanted to test this drive in the process was, hey, they went and scanned one of their systems that actually had sensitive data on it. Then they were able to see the root cause, and then within 3 hours, they were able to take their system from being a couple of hundred vulnerabilities down to 35 during normal business hours. So, which basically, because they focused on the root cause and realized, oh, I don't need that software anymore. Remove it, remove this, I don't need that, delete that. And then that made them, instead of focusing on the vulnerability, it just made their actionable process a lot quicker and cleaner. And their end users didn't even know all this was happening within a system that's being deemed as a high risk system, not only from the data that was housed on it, but also what was discovered from a vulnerabilities perspective.
Yeah, good. That's interesting. Now, what's happening with work from home, right? We're seeing two major trends, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're seeing the home use, right? So people might be accessing data from their home PC or storing data on their home PC because maybe they didn't get a work PC. So I want to talk about that use case. And then the other one is moving into the cloud. You know, we've seen a lot of attacks on open S3 buckets exposing data. How are you addressing kind of those two use cases as we see more trends towards some of those technologies?
It's all about footprint, right? From a data perspective. So the less footprint of data, the less the threat landscape is for potentially having that data compromised or having issues when it comes to like ransomware and other things. So the laptops themselves or BOID devices, especially working from home, basically we go out through an RMM solution, not for us. So if an internal company or a channel partner is using an RMM solution, they push out our agent directly to those laptops, and then on a weekly, monthly, regular basis, scan it for data, scan for vulnerabilities, scan for the secure configuration of it, and then assign mitigation tasks now down to the end user to say, hey, you've got this data in this user directory and your documents and this desktop folder. And guess what? Your OST file has these emails in there. So we don't really always have to connect back to Exchange, because if they're not connected to email and they're just using their laptop is just sitting there, we can scan it and we can scan PSTs, OSTs, and give them information to clear it. Once that footprint is reduced, then it gives the organization a kind of a little bit of a breather, a respite to kind of work on how do we take them from, if we do go back to the office, to make sure that we're secure to bring it back into the office, because we haven't always got the control of every aspect of that device, who connects to, who accesses it, and so forth. But at least we can reduce that risk. From a cloud perspective, we've seen it whereas we're agnostic, right? They can put our agents into Azure, they can put our agents into AWS and various other cloud providers out there. As long as we're able to connect to that asset that actually houses data, we'll scan it and we'll tell you exactly what's on there and perform the same function as if it is directly on your own PC. I can delete it, I can remove it, I can change permissions, I can encrypt it if need be. So it gives people the ability of, do I have to do an API plugin, or do I have to connect to this? Nope, just put your agent somewhere. We call it the side broker sensor, and then you can set it up to go and connect to any type of cloud storage, or you can put another one in your different environments in your cloud environment, whether it's Azure or AWS or Google, Rackspace, and then connect to those assets and perform the same function as if it was on network.
Are you also validating some of the configurations for something like an S3, right? Because misconfiguration of an S3 environment is one of the kind of the main attack routes into exposing data in AWS, for example. Are you also able to validate the configuration of those different S3 environments?
We are moving towards that. So what we started off with is like, for example, your CIS or your DISA state type of benchmarking environments, right? So we've incorporated that into our software that actually goes out and assesses them. So people ask us all the time, hey, do you do PCI secure configurations? Well, we focus on CIS, which covers a lot of NIST, CIS, all the different types of certifications out there. But it gives the person the ability to see exactly where their current state is, how good they are from a grade perspective, an F through to an A, and then what they need to do to get there, whether that is in the cloud or whether that is directly on premise, from Windows to Linux to Unix, to different types of operating systems and device configurations as well. And then we are going to take it to the next level, which starts including into cloud buckets that are out there, like you've got your blob and a type of blob data that Azure has, and you got S3 and other things that are out there that we look at secure configurations in our phase 2 of that approach. As of right now, we're looking at physical workstations, servers, and types of assets from Cisco and all those kind of things from configuration standards. And what the best part is that they can quickly get it through actionable items instead of going through a PDF and scrolling down and trying to find it. It takes time. We give them both the fix and the rationale. And then as part of our roadmap over the next 3 or 4 months is that what we want to try and do is do that what we call a quick click button, which basically means is if you're in a Windows environment, you can actually configure your baseline, what you want, that's standard to CIS. click it, and you import it directly into Active Directory, and you're literally done in a matter of minutes instead of taking hours, days, weeks, or months to get your baseline configuration done.
That's interesting. You used to do a lot of work with Qualys back in the policy compliance days, testing against all those fun CIS benchmarks. So I'm glad somebody made it a little bit easier, because I just remember, going through all those reports and figuring out where all the misconfigurations were. Configuration is so different than vulnerabilities. If the vulnerability exists, it's easy. It's a 0 or 1. But misconfiguration, I mean, you got to set a policy, you got to set a baseline, then you got to figure out how to mitigate or resolve the misconfiguration. It's a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. We actually get phone calls right now from when they've gone and deployed a CIS security certification working through our application process. They'll say, I can't get this service to run. I can't get this to work, because they focus on the details of how to get to what they need to implement based on how we tell them how to do it. But they forget to add in their own type of environment that they have to add to that. So like if a service doesn't start because they forgot to add in the service into the right to log on as a service, because they literally take the letter of the law and say, here's what it is, instead of saying, oh, we'll take this and add our bits into it to make ours functional. So we've got a lot of calls for people saying, hey, it's not working because we followed your standard. Okay, here's how you can go and fix it. So people are moving down the path of wanting to be secure. And I think now more than ever, more and more people are starting to realize with NIST, PCI, and everybody else talking about server hardening images, server configurations, different types are becoming more prevalent in the organizational than it has done previously. Whereas people would do the general kind of stuff, password policy and a few other things. But now they're really focusing on locking it down, because there is certain percentages that it does reduce your risk of compromise by having certain things on there by 10 to 15% by enhancing your server configuration, your desktop configuration, your switches, routers, and so forth.
That's great. Liam, thank you so much for joining us on Security Weekly.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
And if anybody wants to learn more about Cyrisma or get 10% off their monthly bill, please visit securityweekly.com/Cyrisma. And with that, we'll take a break and come back soon with more interviews on Virtual Hacker Summer Camp.